I'm curious about the role of the executive within the board.
Okay.
How does that get determined? What responsibilities do they have? What's the relationship to the board?
That's a great question. So there is the opportunity for the board to strike what's called an executive committee. And an executive committee is a subset of the board. And your board you have to meet certain conditions in order to have an executive committee, and it's that your board has over 6 members, basically. And your executive committee is usually a subset that deals with particular administrative or operational issues. And I've seen this used to great success in cooperatives where you have a limited staff complement or the board is still fairly operational in nature. Having an executive committee that deals with particular administrative and operational things can free up the board as a whole to continue striving for a more strategic focus while having some of the important day-to-day sort of administrivia stuff handled from the executive committee. The executive committee is considered a subset of the board, and so they do report to the board and aren't considered independent. As a result, the authority and decision-making still rests with the board as a whole. So the executive committee may be delegated to make a few, to spend up to a certain amount or to have a certain amount of power under the discretion of the board. But they certainly don't have the full decision-making powers of the board that only the full board has when they come together. So the executive committee can certainly serve a good function, especially in the startup phase where there are a significant amount of operational or administrative decisions that the board is still being required to make. Delegating some of those to an executive committee can be an important way to free up the board, especially if there's large project discussions or other sorts of things that the board needs to talk about. The executive committee can serve a function there. Not all co-ops make use of it. And generally, the president is always a part of the executive committee, and part of that is just because, as the nominal head of the board, it's important that even if there's some decisions around the operations and administrivia being delegated to that executive committee, it's a good idea for the president as head of the board to at least be aware of the level of those discussions that are taking place. Also, it's not uncommon for the treasurer and secretary to be the other 2 members of the executive because they're responsible in terms of record keeping, financial, and being the nominal head of the board. They are the 3 officer positions that really deal with the operational stuff of the cooperative, even in an oversight capacity. So it makes a lot of sense for them to be sitting on the executive committee. Some of this it also varies from co-op to co-op. Some co-ops provide their executive committee with quite a bit of latitude, and some use it simply as a recommendation body around, say policies or something like that. So a lot of this depends on the needs of the cooperative and sort of what other resources exist to help the co-op in the achievement of its mission.
Mm-hmm. And they would be expected to keep minutes that would be available to the rest of the board.
And I would argue that although there's nothing in the Act about committees having to keep minutes, I think it's really important that committees keep minutes, at least in terms of a record of recommendations that they're making to the board, and especially in the case of an executive committee, I would argue that it's particularly important because they are likely to be making a different level of decisions than, say, your marketing committee might be.
Mm-hmm. Great, thank you.
No problem. Other questions?
We have a question online from Jeff.
Okay.
In a startup workers co-op with 4 people, would those 4 workers act as the board as well? What does this look like? And is there reference material to this type of scenario on the toolkit link provided?
Yes. So in a worker cooperative, it is quite interesting because the members, the employees, and the board are effectively those roles are all filled by the same small group of people, especially in a case where you've only got 4 people in your co-op. They are acting as the board. Effectively, your membership meetings are board meetings because, your board is made up of your membership. We don't have anything super specific to worker cooperatives on our website, but the Canadian Worker Cooperative Federation, which is canadianworker.coop, does have a number of great resources around specifically structuring worker cooperatives and financial and structure questions around worker cooperatives specifically, because it is a particular type of model. So certainly they would be more likely to have structure issues. And Hazel and Peter, who are the staff people with the Canadian Worker Co-op Federation, Peter is a longtime co-op developer, and so is Hazel, and they can certainly answer any questions. Both of their contact information is on there about some of these issues around, how do you deal with communication, how do you deal with members having these multiple roles in worker co-ops of employee, board, and members. And Peter in particular has done a lot of work with worker co-ops and can be an excellent resource around some of that. Russ Christensen here in Ontario has also had a lot of experience with, as a co-op developer that's had a lot of experience with worker co-ops, and we can certainly make his contact information available to you, but the Peter's information is certainly available on the Canadian Worker Co-op Federation site. Worker co-ops are certainly more complex around this relationship of member, board, and employee, because you've got groups of people occupying multiple roles, and it can be quite confusing. Okay, so we're going to draw this to a close a few minutes early. So I hope that this workshop, this webinar met your needs in terms of providing some information around co-op structure.